The chains cut into Elena's wrists as the crowd roared around her, hungry eyes studying her like she was nothing more than meat on a hook. She had known fear before, but nothing like this. The wooden platform beneath her feet creaked with every step she took, and the smell of smoke and sweat from hundreds of gathered wolves filled her lungs until she could barely breathe. Her own father had signed the papers. Her own mother had looked away when the guards came to collect her. A debt owed to the Blackthorn Pack, they said. A debt that could only be paid in blood or in flesh, and since there was no blood left to give, they gave her instead. Elena stood at the center of the auction block, her bare feet cold against the stone, her simple gray dress doing nothing to hide the trembling in her body. Around her, wolves of every size and shade watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to cruelty. Somewhere in that crowd was the man who would decide the rest of her life, and she did not even know his name yet. Fresh blood, the auctioneer called out. A thin, wiry wolf named Edgar Pruitt, who wore a coat far too fine for the filth of his trade, untouched, unclaimed, and marked by fate herself. Look closely, friends. This one carries something rare upon her skin. Elena's stomach turned. She hated the way he spoke about her, as if she were a prized animal rather than a living, breathing girl of 22 years who had once dreamed of simple things like a quiet home and a garden of her own. Those dreams felt like they belonged to another life now, a life that had ended the moment the Blackthorn enforcers dragged her from her family's doorstep. The bidding began slowly, hesitant murmurs rippling through the crowd. Then a deep, growling voice cut through the noise like a blade through cloth. 50,000. Elena's eyes snapped toward the sound. A tall, broad-shouldered wolf stepped forward from the front row, his dark hair slicked back, his eyes the color of wet slate. Draven Cross. She did not know his name yet, but she would learn it soon enough, and she would learn to fear it more than she feared death itself. He was the alpha of the Blackthorn Pack, the very pack her family owed their debt to, and something about the hunger in his gaze told her that money was not the only thing he wanted from her. The crowd gasped at the number. 50,000 was a fortune, more than most packs would spend on an entire season of supplies, but Draven did not blink. He wanted her, and in his world, wanting something meant taking it. 50,000 going once, Edgar called, his voice trembling with excitement at the size of the sale. Going twice. 100,000. The words landed like thunder. The crowd fell utterly silent, and even Draven Cross turned, his jaw tightening at the sound of a voice he clearly recognized. Elena searched the sea of faces until she found the source, and when she did, her breath caught in her throat. He was not like the others. Where Draven radiated menace, this man carried something different entirely. A quiet, commanding presence that made every wolf in the room instinctively lower their gaze. He was tall, taller than Draven, with golden brown hair swept back from a sharp, handsome face, and eyes so pale blue they almost looked silver in the torchlight. He wore no crown, no obvious symbol of rank, yet the moment he spoke, the entire auction house seemed to bow without moving an inch. Cale Ashford, the Alpha King. Elena had heard stories of him, whispered in taverns and market squares, tales of a ruler who commanded every pack across the territories, who settled disputes between alphas with a single word, who was said to be both merciless in war and just in peace. She had never imagined she would see him with her own eyes, and certainly never imagined he would be standing here, at a slave auction, bidding on her. Draven's face twisted with barely concealed rage. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice tight with forced respect. "I was not aware the crown had any interest in common auctions." "There is little that escapes my interest, Draven," Cale replied smoothly, not even glancing at the other alpha. His eyes remained fixed on Elena, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away and yet somehow could not. "Consider this matter settled." The auctioneer, sensing an opportunity too good to lose, quickly raised his gavel. 100,000, going once, going twice, sold to the Alpha King. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd, shock and confusion, and no small amount of fear. Elena's knees nearly buckled with relief, though relief felt like the wrong word for what she was feeling. She had been sold, yes, but sold to whom? And for what purpose? Kings did not attend auctions for common girls. There had to be a reason, and reasons in this world were rarely kind. Guards approached the platform, and rough hands guided her down the steps, past the still glaring form of Draven Cross, who watched her leave with an expression that promised this was not the end of his interest in her. She shivered under his gaze, grateful when she was finally led away from him, and toward the tall figure of the Alpha King. Up close, Cale Ashford was even more imposing than she had realized. He did not touch her, did not grab her arm, or speak to her the way the guards had, the way Draven's men had. He simply looked at her, his pale eyes moving slowly over her face, as if searching for something specific. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was low, steady, nothing like the mocking tones of the auctioneer. "Elena," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Elena Voss. Elena Voss," he repeated, as though testing the shape of it. Then, without another word, he gestured for a cloak to be brought, and draped it gently over her shoulders, covering the thin dress that had left her exposed to the cold and to the eyes of strangers. It was such a small gesture, and yet it startled her more than anything else that had happened that day. No one had shown her kindness in weeks. No one had treated her as though she deserved to be warm. "Come," Cale said simply. "You are leaving this place." She wanted to ask why. She wanted to demand answers, to know what fate awaited her now that she belonged to the most powerful man in the territories. But her voice failed her, and instead she simply followed, her chained wrists still bound though he had ordered the guards to loosen them the moment they stepped outside the auction house. The carriage that waited for them was unlike anything Elena had ever seen. Sleek black wood trimmed with silver, pulled by 4 enormous wolves in their shifted forms, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim evening light. Cale helped her inside himself, his hand steady and careful, as though she were something fragile that might break if handled too roughly. Once they were settled and the carriage began to move, Elena finally found the courage to speak. "Why did you buy me?" Cale was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the small window where the auction house grew smaller behind them. "Because Draven Cross should never have been allowed to make his bid in the first place," he said finally. "And because there is something about you that I need to understand." "Something about me?" Elena's confusion deepened. "I am no one. I have no pack, no title, nothing that would interest a king." Cale's eyes returned to her, and this time, there was something almost gentle in his expression, though his voice remained measured and controlled. "That is what you believe, but belief and truth are not always the same thing." She wanted to press him further, to demand a clearer answer, but exhaustion was beginning to overtake her, the events of the day finally catching up with her trembling body. The warmth of the cloak, the steady rocking of the carriage, the strange safety she felt despite not understanding any of it, all combined to pull her toward sleep even as questions swirled endlessly in her mind. Before her eyes closed completely, she caught Cale watching her again, his gaze lingering on the collar of her dress, on the small patch of skin just below her collarbone, where a birthmark had rested since the day she was born. She had always thought it was nothing more than an unusual mark, a strange design in muted red and gold that her mother once called a curse, and her father had simply ignored. She had never once considered that it might mean something more. Cale's expression, in that final moment before sleep claimed her, was not one of simple curiosity. It was something closer to recognition, the look of a man who had spent years searching for something he had begun to believe did not exist, only to find it staring back at him in the trembling, frightened eyes of a girl he had just bought from a slave auction. The carriage rolled on through the darkening countryside, carrying Elena away from the cruelty of Draven Cross and the auction block, and toward a fate she could not yet imagine, one that would soon reveal itself to be far stranger, far more dangerous, and far more important than she could ever have guessed. Behind them, in the shadows of the auction house, Draven Cross stood watching the carriage disappear into the night, his fists clenched at his sides, already plotting how he might reclaim what he believed should have been his. Elena did not know it yet, but the mark upon her skin had just changed the course of her entire life, and there would be no going back to the girl she once was. Elena woke to the soft glow of morning light filtering through unfamiliar curtains, and for a moment, panic gripped her chest as she tried to remember where she was. The bed beneath her was soft, softer than anything she had ever slept on, and the room around her was larger than the entire cottage she had grown up in. Fear returned quickly, sharp and immediate, until the events of the previous night came rushing back to her. The auction, the chains, the Alpha King. She sat up slowly, taking in her surroundings with wide, cautious eyes. The walls were made of pale stone, decorated with tapestries depicting wolves in various poses of strength and unity. A large window overlooked what appeared to be an enormous courtyard, and beyond that, mountains rose in the distance, capped with snow even in the warmer months. Wherever she was, it was nothing like the world she had known before. A soft knock at the door startled her, and before she could respond, it opened to reveal a young woman with warm brown skin and curly dark hair, pulled back into a neat bun. She carried a tray of food and smiled gently as she entered. "Good morning," the woman said, setting the tray down on a small table near the bed. "My name is Adeline. I have been asked to look after you during your stay." Elena blinked in surprise. "My stay? I thought I was..." She hesitated, unsure how to phrase it. I thought I belonged to someone now. Adeline's expression softened with something like sympathy. I understand this must be confusing, but you are not a prisoner here, and you are certainly not property. His Majesty has given clear instructions that you are to be treated as a guest. A guest, Elena repeated, disbelief coloring her voice. I was sold at an auction. That is not how guests arrive at a king's home. No, Adeline agreed quietly. It is not. But things are not always as they first appear, especially in a place like this. She gestured toward the tray of food. Please, eat something. You must be hungry after everything you have been through. Elena's stomach growled despite her wariness, and she found herself unable to resist the warm bread and fresh fruit that had been prepared for her. As she ate, Adeline moved about the room, opening curtains further and laying out a set of clean clothes far finer than anything Elena had ever owned. Where exactly am I? Elena asked between bites. This is Ashford Keep, Adeline explained, the seat of the Alpha King's rule, home to the royal pack and the center of governance for all the territories. Elena nearly choked on her bread. The Alpha King lives here? And I am staying in his home? You are, Adeline confirmed, though there was something careful in the way she said it, as though she were choosing her words with great precision. His Majesty asked that you be given anything you need, and that you be allowed to rest as long as necessary before he speaks with you again. Speaks with me about what? Elena pressed, setting down her food. Why would a king want to speak with someone like me at all? Adeline's smile faltered slightly, and for a moment, Elena thought she might actually answer honestly. But instead, the young woman simply shook her head. That is not something I am able to explain. I believe His Majesty wishes to tell you himself. Frustration bubbled up inside Elena, but she swallowed it down, recognizing that pushing further would likely accomplish nothing. Instead, she allowed Adeline to help her dress in the clean clothing that had been provided, a simple but well-made gown in deep green that fit her surprisingly well, as though someone had taken careful measurements while she slept. Someone measured me while I was unconscious? Elena asked, a note of alarm creeping into her voice. Only enough to guess your size, Adeline reassured her quickly, nothing more. His Majesty was very clear that your privacy and dignity were to be respected at all times. Elena wanted to believe that, wanted desperately to trust the kindness being shown to her, but a lifetime of disappointment and betrayal had taught her caution above all else. Her own family had sold her without a second thought. Why should she believe a king, a stranger, would treat her any differently? As if summoned by her thoughts, another knock came at the door, this one firmer, more purposeful. Adeline moved to answer it, and when the door swung open, Cale Ashford himself stood on the other side, dressed now in simple dark clothing that somehow still managed to convey authority without any obvious symbols of rank. Leave us, Adeline, he said quietly, and the young woman bowed her head before slipping past him and out of the room, closing the door softly behind her. Elena straightened her spine, determined not to appear as frightened as she felt. Your Majesty, she said carefully. You may call me Cale, he replied, moving further into the room but keeping a respectful distance from where she sat. Titles are not necessary between us, not given the circumstances. What circumstances? Elena asked, her frustration finally breaking through her careful composure. I still do not understand why I am here. Why did you buy me? Why does anyone care about a girl with no pack and no family who wants her? Cale's expression grew solemn, and he moved to sit in a chair near the window, gesturing for her to remain where she was on the bed. May I ask you something first? Elena hesitated, then nodded slowly. The mark on your skin, Cale said carefully, just below your collarbone. Do you know what it means? Elena's hand instinctively rose to touch the spot, though the fabric of her gown covered it now. My mother called it a curse. My father never spoke of it at all. I have had it since birth, but no one ever explained what it was supposed to represent. It is not a curse, Cale said, his voice quiet but firm. It is a mark of lineage, one that has not been seen in this territory for over 100 years. I believe, though I cannot yet be certain, that you may be descended from a bloodline that was thought to have died out generations ago. Elena stared at him, waiting for the explanation to make sense, but instead it only deepened her confusion. A bloodline? I am human. I have no connection to any pack, no wolf blood in my veins at all. That may be true, Cale acknowledged, and yet the mark suggests otherwise, or at the very least, suggests a connection that predates your own understanding of your family's history. There is much I still need to investigate before I can give you a complete answer. Then why bring me here? Elena asked, desperation creeping into her voice. Why not simply leave me to my fate at that auction if you were not certain of anything? Cale's pale eyes met hers directly, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something raw beneath his controlled exterior. Because Draven Cross would not have treated you with any kindness, mark or no mark. And because if I am right about what you carry within you, then your safety matters a great deal more than either of us currently understands. The weight of his words settled over Elena like a heavy blanket, both comforting and suffocating at once. She did not know whether to trust him, did not know whether any of this was truly about protecting her or about some larger political game she could not yet see the shape of, but she also recognized, with a reluctant clarity, that she had no other choice but to remain and learn what she could. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now," Cale said, rising from his chair, "you rest, you heal from whatever trials you have endured, and you allow me to investigate the truth of your lineage. I will not force anything upon you, Elena. Whatever choices lie ahead, they will be yours to make." She wanted to believe him. Some small, cautious part of her heart wanted desperately to believe that kindness like this could be real, that not every powerful man in her life would seek to use her for his own purposes. But years of hardship had taught her to guard herself carefully, and so she simply nodded, watching as Cale moved toward the door. Before he left, he paused, turning back to look at her one final time. "For what it is worth," he said softly, "I am sorry for what was done to you. No one should ever be treated the way you were treated at that auction. You deserve far better than that, mark or no mark." Then he was gone, leaving Elena alone with her racing thoughts and the strange, unfamiliar warmth of his words settling somewhere deep inside her chest. Outside her window, the mountains stood silent and eternal, keeping their own secrets just as the mark on her skin kept secrets of its own, secrets that were only beginning to unravel. Elena did not know what the coming days would bring, but for the first time since her family had signed away her freedom, she allowed herself a small, fragile flicker of hope. 3 days passed before Cale summoned Elena again, 3 days during which she wandered the halls of Ashford Keep under Adeline's careful guidance, growing slowly more accustomed to her strange new surroundings. She had expected guards to watch her every move, chains to bind her wrists the moment she stepped outside her chambers, but instead she found only quiet respect from the staff and a freedom she had not anticipated. Still, freedom without understanding felt like its own kind of prison, and when a servant arrived to escort her to the Keep's grand library, Elena felt her pulse quicken with anticipation. Perhaps now, finally, she would receive real answers. The library was unlike anything she had ever imagined, towering shelves stretching toward a vaulted ceiling, filled with more books and scrolls than she could count in a lifetime. Cale stood near a large table at the center of the room. Several ancient-looking texts spread out before him, their pages yellowed with age, and their leather bindings cracked from centuries of handling. "Elena," he greeted her, gesturing for her to approach. "Thank you for coming. You said you needed to investigate my lineage," she said, moving closer to examine the texts on the table. "Have you found something?" Cale nodded, his expression a careful mixture of certainty and caution. "I have spent the last 3 days searching through the royal archives, cross-referencing historical records with the description of your mark. What I have found is..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Significant." He turned one of the ancient books toward her, revealing a detailed illustration on its yellowed page. Elena's breath caught in her throat. The image showed a mark nearly identical to the one on her own skin, rendered in faded red and gold ink, surrounded by text written in a language she did not recognize. "What is this?" she whispered, her fingers hovering over the page without quite touching it. "This," Cale said, "is the Lyrian insignia, a bloodline that once held tremendous influence across all the territories, long before the current pact system was established. The Lyrian line was said to carry a rare gift, the ability to forge bonds between warring pacts, to unite fractured territories under a single banner of peace." Elena's mind raced, trying to reconcile the story with her own humble upbringing, her simple family, her ordinary life before everything had fallen apart. "That cannot be me," she said finally. "My family has no history of nobility, no connection to anything so grand. We were farmers, Cale, ordinary people struggling to survive." "Ordinary on the surface, perhaps," Cale replied gently. "But bloodlines do not always announce themselves through wealth or title. Sometimes they hide for generations, waiting for circumstances to reveal them once again." The Lyrian line was said to have vanished nearly 150 years ago, during a great conflict that nearly tore the territories apart entirely. "What happened to them?" Elena asked, unable to look away from the illustrated mark that mirrored her own so precisely. Cale's expression darkened slightly. "Hunted, nearly wiped out entirely by rival pacts who feared the power their bloodline represented. A single unifying force threatened the ambitions of many alphas who preferred division. who preferred to rule smaller territories without answering to any higher authority. The surviving members of the Lyrian line were forced into hiding, many changing their names, abandoning their titles, blending into human society to escape further persecution. Elena sank slowly into a nearby chair, the weight of this revelation settling over her like a physical burden. You believe my family did exactly that, hid their heritage so completely that even they eventually forgot the truth of where they came from. It is the most logical explanation, Kale said. The mark does not lie, Elena. It appears only within true descendants of the Lyrian bloodline, and it has not been documented anywhere in the territories for over a century, until now. Why does this matter so much? Elena asked, though even as she spoke the words, she suspected she already understood part of the answer. Why would the Alpha King himself spend 3 days searching ancient texts for confirmation of some forgotten bloodline? Kale was quiet for a long moment, his pale eyes studying her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and understood in a way she had never experienced before. Because my own family's claim to the throne was built upon a pact made with the Lyrian line, centuries ago, a promise that when the bloodline reappeared, whoever held the throne would honor and protect it, would ensure its safety and its rightful place within the territories once again. Elena's eyes widened. You are saying your family owes some kind of debt to mine? A sacred obligation, Kale corrected softly. One that predates my own birth. One that has been passed down through generations of Ashford rulers as a solemn duty. When I saw your mark at the auction, I understood immediately what it meant, and I could not allow you to fall into the hands of someone like Draven Cross, someone who would surely exploit such a discovery for his own political gain. The pieces began falling into place within Elena's mind, though the full picture remained overwhelming in its scope. So this is why you bought me. Not out of kindness, but out of obligation. Something flickered across Kale's face, quick and difficult to interpret. The obligation brought me to that auction, yes. But the kindness you have witnessed since then has been entirely my own choice, separate from any ancient pact or bloodline debt. Elena studied him carefully, searching for any sign of deception, any hint that his words were merely convenient explanations meant to keep her compliant and grateful. But his expression remained steady, sincere in a way that was difficult to dismiss entirely. What happens now? She asked finally. If this bloodline truly matters as much as you suggest, what does that mean for my future? Kale closed the ancient book carefully, his movements deliberate and thoughtful. It means, first and foremost, that your safety becomes a matter of significant political importance. Other alphas will hear of this discovery eventually, and some may see you as a valuable asset, others as a dangerous threat to their own ambitions. Draven Cross, in particular, will not easily accept losing you, especially once he understands what your mark represents. A chill ran through Elena's body at the mention of Draven's name, memories of his hungry, calculating gaze at the auction still fresh in her mind. He wanted me even before he knew about the mark, she said quietly. What will he do once he learns the truth? That is precisely why I intend to keep this discovery contained for as long as possible, Kale said firmly. The fewer people who know the full truth of your lineage, the safer you will remain while we determine the best path forward. Elena appreciated his caution, though a part of her still wrestled with the enormity of what she had just learned. Only days ago she had been a nameless girl sold at auction, and now she was being told she carried the blood of a legendary lineage capable of shaping the fate of entire territories. The transformation felt impossible, disorienting, like waking up inside someone else's life entirely. I need time to understand all of this, she admitted, her voice smaller than she intended. Of course, Kale said, his tone gentling once again. Take whatever time you need. I only ask that you remain within the keep's protection while we navigate these developments together. The dangers outside these walls have grown considerably more complicated now that your identity has been confirmed. Elena nodded slowly, though uncertainty still churned within her chest. She rose from her chair, preparing to return to her chambers and process the staggering revelations of the day. But Kale's voice stopped her before she reached the library door. Elena, he said softly, and she turned back to face him. Whatever comes next, whatever burdens this bloodline places upon you, know that you will not face them alone. I intend to honor the pact my ancestors made, in every sense of the word. She held his gaze for a long moment, searching for reassurance within his steady, pale eyes. Whether she fully believed him or not, something about his sincerity settled a small measure of the fear churning inside her, enough to allow her to nod once more, before finally leaving the library and returning to the quiet solitude of her chambers. Outside the keep's ancient walls, however, whispers had already begun to spread through the territories, carried by servants and guards who had witnessed the Alpha King's strange behavior at the auction days earlier. Word travels quickly among wolves, and it would not be long before those whispers reached the ears of Draven Cross himself, setting into motion events that would soon threaten everything Elena had only just begun to understand about her own extraordinary heritage. The days that followed brought a strange new rhythm to Elena's life within Ashford Keep, one that felt neither like captivity nor complete freedom, but something uncertain and undefined caught between the two. She rose each morning to find breakfast waiting in her chambers, spent her afternoons wandering the keep's gardens under Adeline's watchful companionship, and each evening found herself increasingly aware of Cale's presence somewhere within the vast stone walls, even when they did not speak directly. Despite the comfort of her surroundings, Elena could not shake the persistent feeling that she remained, in some fundamental way, a prisoner. The doors leading beyond the keep's outer walls were never explicitly locked, yet guards always seemed to appear whenever she wandered too close to the boundaries of the property, polite but firm in redirecting her back toward the central gardens. "You seem troubled today," Adeline observed one afternoon as they walked together beneath a canopy of blooming trees, their branches heavy with pale pink flowers that scattered petals across the stone pathways. "I am grateful for the kindness shown to me here," Elena said carefully, choosing her words with the same caution she had maintained since arriving. "But I cannot help wondering whether this is truly freedom, or simply a more comfortable form of confinement." Adeline's expression grew thoughtful, and for a long moment she said nothing, her gaze drifting toward the distant mountains visible beyond the garden walls. "I understand your uncertainty," she said finally, "but please believe me when I say that His Majesty's intentions toward you are genuine. I have served this household for many years, and I have never seen him treat anyone with the same careful consideration he shows you." "Careful consideration born from ancient obligation," Elena countered, unable to fully release the suspicion that had guarded her heart since childhood, "not from any true regard for who I am as a person." "Perhaps it began that way," Adeline acknowledged, "but you have been here nearly 2 weeks now. Have his actions truly felt like mere obligation to you?" Elena considered the question honestly, recalling the countless small kindnesses she had witnessed since her arrival. Cale had personally ensured her chambers were stocked with books after learning of her love for reading, had arranged for a skilled healer to examine an old injury on her ankle that had never properly mended, had even taken time from his considerable responsibilities to sit with her occasionally in the evenings, asking questions about her childhood, her interests, her hopes for a future she had never dared imagine before now. "I do not know what to believe anymore," Elena admitted quietly. "Every instinct within me says to remain cautious, to trust no one, especially not a man with as much power as the Alpha King possesses. And yet, Adeline prompted gently. "And yet something about him makes that caution feel increasingly difficult to maintain," Elena finished, surprised by her own honesty. Adeline smiled softly, though she offered no further commentary on the matter, allowing Elena's own thoughts to settle without additional pressure. They continued their walk in comfortable silence, eventually returning toward the keep's main entrance where an unexpected commotion awaited them. Several guards stood clustered near the entrance, their postures tense and alert, and Elena's stomach twisted with immediate unease as she recognized the source of their concern. A carriage bearing unfamiliar markings had arrived at the keep's gates, and standing beside it, unmistakable even from a distance, was Draven Cross. Elena froze, her feet suddenly unwilling to carry her any closer to the confrontation unfolding ahead. Adeline placed a steadying hand on her arm, though her own expression betrayed similar concern. "Come," Adeline urged quietly. "We should return to your chambers immediately." But before they could retreat, Cale emerged from the keep's main hall, his posture radiating a controlled authority that seemed to still the very air around him. He moved directly toward Draven, positioning himself between the visiting Alpha and the entrance to his home. "This is an unexpected visit, Draven," Cale said, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard despite its measured calm. "I do not recall extending an invitation." "Forgive the intrusion, Your Majesty," Draven replied, though his tone carried none of the deference his words suggested. "I had hoped to discuss the matter of the auction directly, rather than allowing rumors to spread unchecked throughout the territories." "Rumors?" Cale's expression remained impassive, though Elena, watching from a distance, noticed the subtle tension gathering in his shoulders. "Word travels quickly among wolves, as I am sure you are aware," Draven continued, his gaze sweeping the courtyard until it landed, with unsettling precision, directly upon Elena herself. Her breath caught as their eyes met, and she saw something calculating flicker behind his cold expression, particularly word concerning ancient bloodlines thought long extinct. Cale's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, positioning himself more fully between Draven and Elena's line of sight. I am uncertain what you are implying. Come now, Your Majesty, Draven said, his voice dropping to something almost conversational, though the underlying menace remained unmistakable. We both know precisely what I am implying. The girl carries the Lyrian mark, does she not? A discovery of considerable significance, one that certain parties might argue should not remain solely within the crown's control. A tense silence fell across the courtyard, broken only by the distant sound of birdsong and the restless shifting of Draven's guards near the carriage. Elena's heart pounded against her ribs, fear and anger warring within her chest at the casual, possessive way Draven spoke of her mark, as though it were merely a valuable object to be claimed and controlled, rather than a discovery about her own identity and heritage. The girl's lineage is a private matter, currently under my protection, Kael said, his voice hardening slightly. I would advise you to remember your place, Draven, before you make claims that extend beyond your authority. Draven's expression twisted into something resembling a smile, though it held none of the warmth typically associated with such an expression. My authority extends precisely as far as the ancient laws allow, Your Majesty, and those laws state quite clearly that any pack with legitimate historical ties to a reappeared bloodline holds certain rights of consultation, if not outright claim. The Blackthorn pack has no historical ties to the Lyrian line, Kael countered firmly. Perhaps not directly, Draven acknowledged, his gaze once again drifting toward Elena with unsettling interest. But allegiances can be negotiated, arrangements can be made. I am simply here to ensure that whatever decisions are made regarding the girl's future account for the interests of all relevant parties, rather than concentrating such significant power solely within the crown. Elena felt Adeline's grip tighten protectively around her arm, and she found herself grateful for the solid presence beside her, as Draven's calculating gaze finally released her, returning instead to Kael's rigid stance. I have heard your concerns, Kael said finally, his tone leaving no room for further negotiation. And I assure you they have been noted. Now, unless you have additional business requiring my attention, I would ask that you depart my territory. For a long, tense moment, Draven remained motionless, clearly weighing whether to press the confrontation further. But eventually, he offered a shallow, mocking bow. Of course, Your Majesty. I would not wish to overstay my welcome. He turned toward his carriage, then paused, glancing back one final time toward where Elena stood frozen beside Adeline. Until we meet again, Elena Voss. The way he spoke her name sent a fresh wave of dread crashing through her body, and she remained motionless until his carriage had disappeared entirely beyond the keep's outer gates. Only then did Kael turn back toward her, his expression softening slightly as he crossed the courtyard to stand before her. Are you unharmed? He asked quietly. He knows, Elena whispered, still trembling from the encounter. About the mark, about everything. How is that possible? You said we would keep this contained. Servants' talk and secrets rarely remain buried for long, especially within the walls of a royal keep, Kael admitted, frustration evident beneath his controlled exterior. I had hoped for more time before this became public knowledge, but it seems that hope was overly optimistic. What does this mean for me now? Elena asked, fear coloring her voice despite her efforts to remain composed. Kael's expression grew serious, his pale eyes meeting hers with unwavering intensity. It means, unfortunately, that the danger surrounding you has grown considerably. Draven will not simply abandon his interest in your bloodline, and others will likely follow his example once word spreads further. I need you to trust me, Elena, when I say that your safety remains my highest priority, regardless of the political complications this discovery has created. Elena studied his face carefully, searching for any hint of deception, any sign that his concern was merely strategic rather than genuine. But all she found was steady, unwavering resolve, and despite every instinct urging continued caution, she found herself nodding slowly in response. What do we do now? She asked. Now, Kael said, his voice firming with renewed purpose. We ensure that Ashford Keep becomes the safest place in all the territories for you to remain, regardless of who comes seeking to claim what they believe is rightfully theirs. As they turned together to return inside the keep's protective walls, Elena could not shake the growing certainty that Draven Cross's visit marked only the beginning of a much larger storm gathering on the horizon, one that would test not only her own resilience, but the strength of whatever fragile trust had begun forming between herself and the Alpha King who had claimed her from that auction block only weeks before. News of Draven Cross's visit spread through Ashford Keep faster than Elena could have anticipated, and within days, Kael informed her of an even more troubling development. A formal message had arrived from the convocation, the ancient council comprised of every ruling alpha across the territories, requesting an audience regarding what they termed the matter of the reappeared bloodline. They want to discuss me, Elena said flatly, seated across from Cale in his private study, a room she had visited only once before, but which now felt increasingly like the center of decisions shaping her entire future, as though I am a treaty to be negotiated, rather than a person with my own voice in the matter. The convocation rarely concerns itself with individual voices, Cale admitted, his expression grim as he studied the sealed message resting on his desk. Their focus remains fixed on territorial stability, on maintaining balance between competing packs. The reappearance of Lyrian blood threatens that balance considerably, regardless of your own wishes in the matter. Then what happens at this audience? Elena pressed. Will they decide my fate without any consideration for what I actually want? Cale's jaw tightened, though his eyes remained steady on hers. Not if I have any say in the matter, which, fortunately, I do. As Alpha King, I hold significant influence over convocation proceedings, though I cannot dismiss their concerns entirely without risking further destabilization across the territories. Elena rose from her chair, pacing restlessly across the study's stone floor as frustration and fear churned uncomfortably within her chest. I never asked for any of this. I never wanted power, or influence, or whatever it is this bloodline supposedly grants me. All I wanted was a simple life, free from cruelty and control. I understand, Cale said, rising as well, though he maintained a respectful distance rather than crowding her space. And I wish circumstances had allowed you that simple life you deserved. But wishing rarely changes reality, and the reality now is that your bloodline carries significance whether you desire that significance or not. Elena stopped pacing, turning to face him directly, her eyes searching his for some measure of honesty she desperately needed in that moment. Tell me truthfully, Cale, what exactly does this bloodline grant someone? What abilities, what power, could possibly justify the danger now surrounding me? Cale hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. The historical texts suggest that those carrying true Lyrian blood possess an innate sensitivity to pack bonds, an ability to perceive and sometimes influence the connections between wolves, regardless of their pack affiliation. Some accounts suggest even greater capabilities, the power to forge entirely new bonds between previously unconnected packs, effectively uniting them under shared purpose. That sounds impossible, Elena said, though even as she spoke the words, a strange, unfamiliar sensation stirred somewhere deep within her chest, as though some dormant part of herself recognized the truth in his explanation. Have you noticed anything unusual since arriving here? Cale asked carefully, watching her expression closely. Any strange awareness, any sensitivity toward the wolves around you that you cannot easily explain? Elena opened her mouth to deny it, but the words caught in her throat as memories surfaced unbidden. The way she had sensed Adeline's underlying sadness during their walks together, despite the woman's carefully maintained cheerful demeanor, the way she had felt an inexplicable wave of tension radiating from the guards stationed near the keep's entrance during Draven's visit, tension that seemed to extend beyond simple professional alertness into something closer to genuine fear. I thought I was simply becoming more perceptive, Elena admitted slowly, more attuned to the emotions of those around me. I never considered it might be something more than ordinary intuition. Cale's expression shifted, something like validation crossing his features. It is beginning then, the awakening of abilities long dormant within your bloodline, likely triggered by proximity to significant concentrations of pack energy, such as exists here within the keep. What does that mean for me? Elena asked, unease, coloring her voice despite her growing curiosity. It means, Cale said carefully, that your capabilities will likely continue developing, potentially quite rapidly, given your proximity to so many different pack representatives who will soon be arriving for the convocation audience. It also means that demonstrating even a fraction of these abilities publicly could significantly strengthen your position, making it considerably more difficult for anyone, including Draven Cross, to dismiss your autonomy in future negotiations. Elena considered this carefully, weighing the implications against her own instinctive desire to remain hidden, unremarkable, safe from the kind of attention that had already brought Draven's unwelcome interest into her life. Or it could make me an even greater target, she countered. A more valuable prize for someone seeking to control such power for their own ambitions. That risk exists regardless of whether you choose to develop or suppress these abilities, Cale said honestly. The mark alone has already ensured your significance within these political circles. The question becomes whether you wish to face that significance from a position of strength or from a position of vulnerability. The wisdom in his words settled uncomfortably within Elena's chest, and she found herself, despite every instinct urging continued caution, beginning to consider possibilities she had never previously imagined for herself. Perhaps her lineage did not have to remain solely a source of danger and exploitation. Perhaps, with proper guidance and understanding, it could become something else entirely, a source of genuine strength and agency, in a world that had, until recently, offered her nothing but powerlessness. "Will you help me understand these abilities?" she asked finally, meeting his gaze directly. "Not because obligation demands it, but because you believe it is the right path forward?" Something shifted in Cale's expression, warmth replacing the careful formality he typically maintained during their discussions. "I will help you, Elena, for exactly that reason. Whatever else exists between the ancient pact and current political circumstances, my desire to see you safe and empowered exists entirely separate from any obligation." Over the following days, Cale made good on that promise, arranging sessions with a carefully selected group of trusted advisors and healers well versed in the historical accounts of Lyrian abilities. Elena spent hours learning to recognize and interpret the subtle sensations she experienced around different wolves, gradually developing a clearer understanding of how to distinguish simple emotional undercurrents from deeper, more significant pack bond dynamics. The training proved exhausting, both mentally and emotionally, as Elena confronted aspects of herself she had never previously understood or acknowledged. But alongside the exhaustion came something unexpected, a growing sense of purpose and capability that had been entirely absent from her life since her family's betrayal at the auction block. Cale participated in many of these sessions personally, offering guidance and observation that proved invaluable given his own extensive knowledge of pack dynamics accumulated through years of ruling over the territories. Their interactions during this period grew increasingly comfortable, the careful formality of their earlier encounters gradually softening into something approaching genuine partnership, even friendship. "You are progressing remarkably quickly," Cale observed one evening, as they sat together in the keep's gardens following a particularly intense training session, faster than the historical text suggested was typical for awakening Lyrian abilities. "Perhaps circumstances simply demand it," Elena said, though a small, genuine smile tugged at her lips, the first real expression of contentment she had allowed herself since arriving at Ashford Keep. "Or perhaps I have an excellent teacher guiding my progress." Cale's answering smile, though brief, held a warmth that made Elena's heart flutter unexpectedly within her chest. "I suspect the credit belongs primarily to your own determination and resilience. Few could have endured what you experienced at that auction and emerged with such capacity for growth and adaptation." The compliment settled warmly within Elena's chest, and for a moment, she allowed herself to simply enjoy the peaceful evening, the gentle breeze rustling through the garden's flowering trees, and the increasingly comfortable presence of the man beside her, a man who had once seemed impossibly distant and powerful, but who now felt, in quiet moments like this one, surprisingly and reassuringly human. But even as this fragile peace settled between them, the looming shadow of the approaching convocation audience remained, a reminder that whatever comfort and growth Elena had found within Ashford Keep's walls, the wider world beyond continued gathering its forces, preparing for a confrontation that would test everything she had learned and everything Cale had promised to protect. The day of the convocation audience arrived with a tension that seemed to permeate every stone of Ashford Keep. Elena woke before dawn, unable to find any further rest despite the exhaustion still lingering from weeks of intensive training. Adeline arrived shortly after sunrise to help her prepare, dressing her in a gown of deep burgundy that Cale himself had commissioned specifically for the occasion, its design subtly incorporating elements of the ancient Lyrian insignia woven into delicate embroidery along the sleeves and neckline. "You look every bit as significant as the bloodline you carry," Adeline said softly, adjusting the final details of Elena's appearance with careful precision. "I feel like I am about to walk into battle," Elena admitted, studying her reflection in the mirror, hardly recognizing the composed, elegant figure staring back at her, compared to the terrified girl who had stood shivering on that auction block only weeks before. "In many ways you are," Adeline acknowledged honestly, "but you are far better equipped for this particular battle than you might realize." The convocation chamber, when Elena finally arrived alongside Cale, proved even more intimidating than she had anticipated. A vast circular room dominated by a massive stone table, around which sat representatives from every major pack across the territories, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile as Elena entered beside the Alpha King. Draven Cross occupied a prominent seat near the front, his gaze immediately fixing upon her with unsettling intensity. Cale guided her to a position near the center of the chamber, close enough to his own seat of authority that his protective presence remained evident to every wolf gathered, yet positioned in a way that also allowed Elena visibility and voice within the proceedings. rather than relegating her to a passive, silent role. Esteemed members of the convocation, Cale began, his voice carrying easily throughout the vast chamber, commanding immediate attention and silence. You have gathered today to discuss the matter of Elena Voss, confirmed descendant of the Lyrian bloodline, and the implications this discovery holds for our territories. Murmurs rippled through the assembled alphas, though they quickly quieted as Cale continued. Before we proceed further, I wish to make clear the Crown's position on this matter. Elena Voss remains under the direct protection of Ashford Keep, and any decisions regarding her future will account fully for her own wishes and autonomy, alongside considerations of territorial stability. With respect, Your Majesty, a voice called from among the gathered alphas, belonging to an older wolf with graying hair and sharp calculating eyes. The historical precedent regarding Lyrian bloodline reappearances suggests considerably more collective involvement than a single pack's protection allows. The convocation has legitimate interest in ensuring such power does not concentrate solely within one territory's control. The Lyrian bloodline is not a resource to be divided among competing interests, Cale countered firmly. Elena Voss is a person, with her own rights and agency, regardless of the historical significance her heritage carries. Draven Cross rose from his seat, his expression carefully composed despite the tension evident in his rigid posture. Perhaps, then, we should allow Elena Voss to speak for herself regarding her wishes in this matter, rather than continuing to debate her future as though she remains absent from these proceedings. The suggestion, though delivered with apparent reasonableness, carried an unmistakable challenge, and Elena understood immediately that Draven intended to use this opportunity to expose any weakness or uncertainty she might display before the assembled alphas. She felt Cale tense beside her, clearly recognizing the same manipulation, but before he could respond, Elena stepped forward herself, drawing upon every ounce of courage and training she had cultivated over the preceding weeks. I would welcome the opportunity to speak, she said, her voice steadier than she had anticipated, carrying clearly across the vast chamber despite her racing heartbeat. Cale's surprise was evident, though he quickly recovered, nodding his permission and stepping back slightly, to allow her the space to address the gathered alphas directly. I understand that my bloodline carries significance that extends far beyond my own personal wishes, Elena began, meeting the gazes of the assembled wolves with as much steady confidence as she could muster. I understand that many of you view my presence here as a matter requiring careful negotiation and consideration of competing territorial interests. She paused, drawing a steadying breath before continuing. But I would ask each of you to remember that only weeks ago, I stood upon an auction block, sold by my own family to settle a debt I had no part in creating. I was treated as property, as a commodity, to be traded and controlled by those with greater power than myself. Several alphas shifted uncomfortably at this reminder, though Draven's expression remained carefully neutral. I have no interest in becoming a pawn once again, traded between competing packs based on political calculation rather than genuine consideration for my own well-being. Elena continued, her voice growing steadier with each passing moment. The ancient pact between my bloodline and the Crown of Ashford exists to ensure protection and honor for the Lyrian line, not exploitation for territorial advantage. A noble sentiment, the graying alpha who had spoken earlier interjected. But sentiment alone cannot guarantee the stability this discovery threatens to disrupt. Then allow me to offer more than sentiment, Elena said, drawing upon the training she had undertaken with Cale's guidance over recent weeks. Closing her eyes briefly, she extended her awareness outward, focusing on the complex web of pack bonds present within the chamber, sensing the underlying tensions and alliances that existed between the various territories represented. When she opened her eyes again, she addressed the assembled alphas with newfound clarity. I sense considerable tension between the northern territories and those bordering the eastern mountains, tension rooted in disputed hunting grounds that has persisted for nearly 3 generations without resolution. I also sense underlying resentment from several smaller packs toward the larger territories who have historically dominated convocation proceedings, denying smaller voices equal consideration. Shocked silence fell across the chamber, as Elena's words struck uncomfortably close to conflicts that many alphas had assumed remained carefully hidden from outside awareness. Even Draven's composed expression faltered slightly, clear surprise evident in his calculating eyes. The historical accounts of Lyrian capabilities are accurate, Cale said quietly, stepping forward once again to stand beside Elena, his presence lending additional weight to her demonstration. Elena's abilities, still developing, already demonstrate significant potential for understanding and potentially resolving the very tensions many of you have struggled to address for generations. This changes nothing regarding the fundamental question of control, Draven said, though his voice carried noticeably less certainty than before. Regardless of her capabilities, the matter of which pack holds authority over her future remains unresolved. I hold authority over my own future, Elena interjected firmly, drawing the attention of every alpha present back toward herself. I have chosen to remain under the protection of Ashford Keep, not because ancient obligation demands it, but because I have witnessed genuine respect and consideration for my autonomy within these walls, consideration I have found nowhere else since this journey began. Her words hung in the tense silence of the chamber, and for a long moment, no one spoke, each alpha clearly weighing the implications of her declaration against their own political calculations and ambitions. Finally, an elderly alpha near the back of the chamber, one who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, rose slowly to his feet. I move that the convocation formally recognize Elena Voss's autonomy in this matter, alongside the Crown's continued responsibility for her protection under the ancient Lyrian Pact, he said, his voice carrying quiet but unmistakable authority, born from decades of experience within these proceedings. Murmurs of agreement rippled through portions of the assembled alphas, though Draven's expression remained tight with barely concealed frustration. After several tense minutes of quiet deliberation among the gathered representatives, the motion carried by a clear majority, formally establishing Elena's protected status, while simultaneously acknowledging her personal agency in matters concerning her own future. As the convocation session drew to its conclusion, Elena felt a mixture of relief and continued wariness settling within her chest. The formal recognition provided a measure of protection previously absent from her circumstances, yet she remained acutely aware that not every alpha present had accepted this outcome graciously, particularly not Draven Cross, whose calculating gaze followed her exit from the chamber with an intensity that promised this confrontation was far from truly resolved. Kale walked closely beside her as they departed the chamber, his expression carefully composed despite the visible tension still evident in his shoulders. "You handled that remarkably well," he said quietly, once they had moved beyond earshot of the dispersing alphas. "I had an excellent teacher," Elena replied, echoing her earlier words from their garden conversation, though this time her voice carried genuine confidence rather than simple gratitude. But even as she allowed herself a small measure of satisfaction at the outcome of the convocation proceedings, Elena could not shake the persistent unease that had settled deep within her chest since witnessing Draven Cross's barely concealed fury. Political defeat rarely deterred wolves like him entirely, and she suspected, with a certainty she wished she did not possess, that his next move would prove considerably less concerned with proper convocation protocols and considerably more dangerous than anything she had yet faced. Weeks passed following the convocation audience, and though Elena remained vigilant, the anticipated retaliation from Draven Cross failed to materialize immediately, allowing a fragile sense of normalcy to settle over Ashford Keep once again. Her training continued, her abilities growing steadily stronger under Kale's careful guidance, and the comfortable familiarity that had begun developing between them deepened further with each passing day. It was during one such ordinary evening, as Elena walked alone through the Keep's gardens following a lengthy training session, that the peace shattered without warning. She sensed it before she saw it, a sudden spike of hostile intent radiating from the shadows near the garden's outer wall, so intense and immediate that she instinctively froze in place, every instinct screaming danger even before her rational mind fully processed the threat. Her newly developed sensitivity to pack bonds and emotional undercurrents had never registered anything so sharp, so purposefully malevolent. A figure emerged from the darkness before she could call for help, moving with the speed and precision of a trained assassin, rather than an ordinary intruder. Elena barely had time to register the glint of a blade before instinct took over, her body twisting away from the initial strike, though not quickly enough to avoid it entirely. Pain seared across her upper arm as the blade caught her, tearing through fabric and skin alike. She stumbled backward, crying out both in pain and in desperate hope that someone within the keep might hear her, but the attacker pressed forward relentlessly, clearly determined to finish what they had started before help could possibly arrive. Elena's mind raced, drawing upon every ounce of training she had received, not in physical combat, which she had never learned, but in the sensing abilities that had become her newest and most valuable skill. Reaching outward with her awareness, she sensed the attacker's pack bond clearly now, tracing it back toward a distant, unmistakable source. Blackthorn. Draven Cross had finally made his move, though through indirect means rather than open confrontation. The realization gave her no comfort as the attacker lunged again, and Elena barely managed to dodge the strike, stumbling further backward until she collided painfully with the garden's stone wall, trapped with nowhere left to retreat. Terror gripped her chest as the assassin raised their blade once more, clearly intent on ensuring this attempt succeeded where the first strike had failed. Then, suddenly, powerful jaws closed around the assassin's raised arm, and a massive wolf, larger than any Elena had previously encountered, tore the attacker away from her with brutal, decisive force. The assassin's scream of pain echoed through the garden as Kale, fully shifted into his wolf form, pinned them to the ground with terrifying efficiency, his golden brown fur bristling with barely controlled fury. Guards arrived moments later, alerted by the commotion, quickly securing the wounded assassin while Kale shifted back to his human form, rushing immediately to Elena's side, his expression a mixture of fierce protectiveness and barely concealed panic. "Elena," he said urgently, his hands hovering carefully near her injured arm without quite touching it, "how badly are you hurt?" "I will be fine," she managed, though the pain radiating from her wounds suggested otherwise, and the growing lightheadedness beginning to cloud her vision certainly did not support her reassurance. Kale's expression darkened with concern as he examined the wound more closely. "This blade was likely coated with something beyond ordinary poison. We need to get you to the healers immediately." The journey back to the keep's healing chambers passed in a disorienting blur for Elena, her consciousness fading in and out as pain and whatever substance had coated the assassin's blade began taking a more severe toll on her body. She was vaguely aware of Kale's constant presence beside her, his voice a steady anchor even as her own thoughts grew increasingly fragmented and difficult to follow. "The poison is spreading faster than expected," she heard a healer's voice say, tinged with obvious alarm, as Elena lay upon a bed within the healing chambers, her body trembling with fever despite the layers of blankets covering her. "Can you counter it?" Kale's voice, tight with barely restrained panic, cut through the haze clouding Elena's mind. "We are attempting every remedy available, Your Majesty, but this particular toxin appears specifically designed to target Lyrian physiology. I fear our conventional treatments may prove insufficient." Elena felt Kale's hand grip hers tightly, his voice dropping to something desperate and raw. "There must be something else we can try. I refuse to simply watch her succumb to this." A tense silence followed, broken finally by the healer's hesitant voice. "There is one possibility, Your Majesty, though it carries considerable risk and requires your direct participation. A partial bonding, sharing enough of your own life force and pack connection to stabilize her system long enough for the poison to run its course naturally." "Do it," Kale said immediately, without hesitation. "Your Majesty, such bonds, even partial ones, carry lasting consequences that cannot easily be undone. Please consider carefully before." "I said do it," Kale repeated firmly. "Whatever risks exist, they pale in comparison to losing her entirely." Elena, drifting at the edge of consciousness, felt something shift within her chest, a sudden warmth spreading outward from where Kale's hand still gripped hers, growing steadily more intense, until it enveloped her entire body in something that felt remarkably like being wrapped in protective, healing light. The fevered trembling that had racked her body began slowly subsiding, and gradually, her scattered thoughts began reassembling into something more coherent. When she finally opened her eyes fully, Kale's face hovered above her, exhaustion evident in every line of his features, though relief flooded his expression the moment their gazes met. "Elena," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion he made no effort to conceal. "You are awake."
"What happened?"
she asked, her voice hoarse and unfamiliar to her own ears. "You were poisoned," Kale explained gently, helping her sit up slightly against the pillows behind her. "The blade that struck you carried a toxin specifically designed to target your bloodline. The healers feared conventional treatments would prove insufficient." "But I am alive," Elena said, confusion evident in her voice as she tried to piece together the fragmented memories of the preceding hours. "You are," Kale confirmed, though something in his careful tone suggested additional complications remained unspoken. "Because I initiated a partial bond between us, sharing enough of my own strength to stabilize your system until the poison could run its course." Elena's eyes widened as the implications of his words settled over her. "A bond? What does that mean, precisely?" Kale's expression grew somewhat hesitant, though he maintained steady eye contact as he explained. "Partial bonds typically exist between pack members of significant trust and connection, allowing shared strength and heightened awareness of each other's well-being. It is not typically undertaken lightly, nor is it easily reversed once established." "You did this without asking me first," Elena said, though her tone carried more confusion than accusation. "You were unconscious, dying," Kale said, his voice tightening with remembered urgency. "I made the decision because there was no time for anything else, and because I could not simply watch you succumb to Draven's attack without attempting everything within my power to save you." Elena considered his words carefully, aware of a subtle new awareness humming quietly at the edges of her consciousness, an awareness she recognized with growing certainty as some lingering connection to Cale himself. She could sense, faintly but unmistakably, an echo of his own concern and relief, layered beneath her own recovering emotions. "I can sense you," she said softly, testing the strange new connection carefully. "Not fully, but enough to know you are relieved and exhausted, and perhaps something else I cannot quite identify." Cale's expression shifted, something vulnerable crossing his features that she had rarely witnessed from him before. "The bond works both directions, though its full extent remains uncertain given the unusual circumstances of its creation." "What happens now?" Elena asked, uncertain whether she was referring to the bond itself or the larger, more complicated situation surrounding Draven's attack and its implications for her continued safety. "Now," Cale said, his voice firming with renewed determination, despite the exhaustion still evident in his features. "Draven Cross faces consequences for this attempted assassination that extend far beyond simple political maneuvering. This was an act of open aggression against someone under the Crown's direct protection, and I intend to ensure he understands precisely how severely such actions will be answered." Elena studied his face carefully, noting the fierce protectiveness evident beneath his controlled exterior, protectiveness that felt, increasingly, like something considerably more personal than mere obligation toward an ancient pact. And within the strange, newly formed bond connecting them, she sensed an answering warmth that suggested her own growing feelings toward him were perhaps not entirely one-sided. But even as this fragile new understanding settled between them, both remained acutely aware that Draven Cross would not simply accept defeat quietly, and that his failed assassination attempt marked only the opening move in what promised to become a considerably more dangerous confrontation still to come. Recovery from the poisoning took several more days, during which Elena grew increasingly accustomed to the strange new bond connecting her to Cale. What had initially felt disorienting and unfamiliar gradually settled into something she found herself, somewhat reluctantly, growing to appreciate. The constant, subtle awareness of his presence, his emotions, his steady strength, provided a comfort she had not anticipated needing so deeply. "Does it feel strange to you as well?" she asked one afternoon, as they sat together in her recovery chambers, sunlight streaming through the windows in warm, golden bands. "This connection between us?" Cale considered the question thoughtfully before responding. "Strange, perhaps, though not unwelcome. I have never shared a bond with anyone before, even a partial one such as this. The experience is entirely new to me as well." "Never?" Elena asked, genuine surprise coloring her voice. "Surely, as Alpha King, you have had numerous opportunities for such connections." "Opportunities, certainly," Cale acknowledged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "But opportunity and genuine desire rarely align as simply as one might assume. Ruling requires constant vigilance regarding motive and intention, particularly from those seeking closer connection to the throne. Trust, genuine trust, has proven considerably rare throughout my life." Elena studied him carefully, recognizing something familiar in his words, an isolation born from constant suspicion that mirrored, in its own way, the wariness she herself had carried throughout her own difficult life. "Yet you formed this bond with me, someone you barely knew when this journey began." "Because circumstances demanded immediate action, yes," Cale admitted. "But if I am entirely honest, Elena, I do not regret the connection this bond has created between us, despite its unconventional beginning." The warmth in his voice, combined with the subtle emotional resonance she could sense through their bond, brought a flush to Elena's cheeks that she could not entirely suppress. "I find myself feeling similarly," she admitted quietly, "which surprises me, given how this entire situation began." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent knock at the door, and Adeline entered without waiting for formal permission, her expression tight with obvious alarm. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but scouts report significant movement along the eastern border. Blackthorn forces are mobilizing in considerable numbers." Cale rose immediately, his relaxed demeanor vanishing instantly, replaced by the commanding authority Elena had witnessed during their first encounter at the auction. "How significant?" "Estimates suggest nearly the entirety of Draven Cross's forces, Your Majesty. This appears to be far more than a simple border patrol." Elena felt her stomach clench with dread, the peaceful comfort of the preceding moments evaporating instantly. "He is coming for me," she said, certainty settling heavily within her chest. "It would appear so," Cale confirmed grimly. "The assassination attempt failed, and given his humiliation at the convocation, Draven has apparently decided more direct action suits his ambitions considerably better than continued political maneuvering." "What do we do?" Elena asked, fear coloring her voice despite her determination to remain composed. We prepare, Cale said firmly, already moving toward the door, his mind clearly shifting toward strategic considerations. Ashford Keep has withstood sieges before, and our defenses remain considerably stronger than anything Draven Cross can hope to overcome. But I need you to remain within the Keep's most protected chambers until this threat has been fully addressed. I refuse to simply hide while others fight to protect me, Elena said, surprising even herself with the firmness of her declaration. I have spent my entire life being powerless, controlled by circumstances and people who never considered my own wishes. I will not simply retreat into hiding now, not when I possess abilities that might actually help defend this keep. Cale paused, studying her with an expression that mixed concern with obvious respect for her determination. Your abilities remain largely untested in situations of open conflict, Elena. I cannot in good conscience allow you to place yourself at unnecessary risk, and I cannot in good conscience allow others to risk their lives defending me, while I remain safely hidden, contributing nothing, Elena countered. Let me help, Cale, please. A tense silence stretched between them, broken finally by Cale's reluctant nod. Very well. But you will remain under close protection at all times, and you will withdraw immediately if the situation grows too dangerous. Do you understand? I understand, Elena agreed, relief flooding through her at his acceptance, tempered by the growing anxiety of the confrontation now rapidly approaching. Over the following hours, Ashford Keep transformed from peaceful sanctuary into a fortress preparing for battle. Guards took up defensive positions along the walls, healers prepared their chambers for potential casualties, and Elena found herself drawn into strategic discussions alongside Cale's most trusted advisors, her unique sensing abilities providing valuable insight into the approaching Blackthorn forces' movements and intentions. I can sense their approach more clearly now, Elena reported during one such strategic session, her eyes closed in concentration as she extended her awareness outward across the surrounding countryside. Draven leads the main force directly, though I sense considerable hesitation among several of his subordinate commanders. Not everyone within his ranks supports this aggressive action. That hesitation could prove valuable, one of Cale's advisors observed thoughtfully. If we can identify which commanders harbor doubts, perhaps diplomatic overtures might fracture their unified front before actual conflict becomes necessary. A reasonable strategy, Cale agreed, though we cannot rely solely on such possibilities given the timeline we face. Draven's forces will reach our borders within hours, not days. Elena continued monitoring the approaching threat throughout the remaining preparation time, her abilities growing steadily more precise with each passing hour, as though the urgency of the situation itself accelerated her developing capabilities. She began sensing not just general troop movements but individual emotional states among key commanders, providing increasingly detailed intelligence that Cale's strategists incorporated into their evolving defensive plans. As evening approached and the first signs of Blackthorn forces became visible upon the horizon, Elena found herself standing alongside Cale atop Ashford Keep's main defensive wall, watching the gathering army with a mixture of fear and grim determination. Are you frightened? Cale asked quietly, his hand finding hers, their fingers interlacing in a gesture that felt natural despite the tension of the moment. Terrified, Elena admitted honestly, but also, strangely, more certain of my own strength than I have ever felt before in my life. Cale turned to look at her fully, his pale eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun behind the approaching army. Whatever happens tonight, Elena, know that you have already proven yourself considerably stronger than the frightened girl who stood upon that auction block weeks ago. Whatever choices come next, they belong entirely to you, bloodline and all its complications notwithstanding. Elena squeezed his hand gently, drawing strength from both his words and the steady warmth of their bond humming quietly between them. Thank you, Cale. For everything you have done, everything you continue to do, even when circumstances make such choices considerably more complicated than they should be. Their quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of a horn blast echoing across the darkening landscape, signaling the imminent arrival of Draven Cross and his assembled forces at the very gates of Ashford Keep. Elena felt Cale's grip tighten slightly around her hand before he released it, moving to take his position of command along the wall, his expression hardening into the fierce determination of a ruler prepared to defend everything he valued most. Elena remained close beside him, drawing upon every ounce of training and developing ability she possessed, prepared to face whatever confrontation Draven Cross had brought to their doorstep, knowing that the outcome of this coming battle would determine not only her own fate, but the future balance of power across every territory under the Convocation's uneasy governance. Draven Cross's forces assembled before the gates of Ashford Keep with terrifying precision, torches illuminating the darkening landscape with an ominous orange glow that cast long shadows across the assembled ranks. Elena watched from the wall above, her heart pounding as she counted the sheer number of warriors Draven had brought to bear against them, considerably more than the scouts had initially estimated. Draven himself rode forward on horseback, positioning himself just beyond arrow range, his voice carrying easily across the distance separating the two forces. "Cale Ashford," he called out, his tone carrying false pleasantness that fooled no one present. "I have come to claim what should rightfully belong to those with genuine historical connection to the Lyrian bloodline, rather than remaining hoarded within a single territory's selfish control." "You have no historical connection to the Lyrian bloodline whatsoever, Draven," Cale called back, his voice carrying equal measure of authority and barely contained fury. "This is nothing more than naked ambition dressed in false justification." "Perhaps," Draven acknowledged with a mocking laugh that echoed unpleasantly across the battlefield, "but ambition matters little compared to actual power, and I intend to claim both the girl and the influence her bloodline provides, regardless of whatever justification you require to accept my victory." "There will be no victory for you tonight," Cale declared firmly. "Withdraw your forces now, Draven, and perhaps some measure of leniency remains possible for this blatant act of aggression against the crown." Draven's response came not in words but in action, as he raised his hand sharply, signaling his assembled forces forward in a coordinated assault against the keep's outer defenses. The battle that followed erupted with brutal, chaotic intensity, warriors clashing against the keep's walls while Cale's own defenders responded with equal ferocity, determined to protect their home and their king from this unprecedented assault. Elena watched the chaos unfold with growing horror, her sensing abilities overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of conflicting emotions radiating from the battlefield below. Fear and fury and desperate determination blending together into an almost unbearable cacophony within her mind. She forced herself to focus, drawing upon her training to filter through the overwhelming sensations, searching specifically for any advantage that might help turn the tide of this dangerous confrontation. "Cale," she called urgently, catching his attention amid the chaos of directing his own defensive forces. "I sense weakness along the eastern flank. Several of Draven's commanders there harbor genuine reluctance about this assault. If we can apply pressure specifically at that point, I believe their resistance might crumble more easily than elsewhere." Cale nodded sharply, immediately redirecting a portion of his forces toward the location Elena had identified, trusting her developing abilities without hesitation despite the pressure of the ongoing battle. The strategy proved remarkably effective, as Elena had predicted, the reluctant commanders offering only token resistance before their portion of Draven's forces began retreating in confused disarray. But even as this small victory unfolded, Draven himself broke away from directing his main assault, moving instead with singular purpose, directly toward the section of wall where Elena stood observing the battle. His intention was unmistakable, and Elena's blood ran cold as she realized he intended to end this confrontation by directly capturing or eliminating her, regardless of the broader battle's outcome. "Elena, retreat to the inner keep immediately," Cale ordered urgently, noticing Draven's approach and moving quickly to intercept the threat himself. But before Elena could comply, Draven's forces breached a section of the outer wall through sheer numerical force, creating chaos that separated her momentarily from her protective escort. She found herself suddenly exposed, standing alone as Draven himself scaled the remaining distance toward her position, with terrifying speed and determination. "Did you truly believe hiding behind Ashford's walls would protect you indefinitely?" Draven snarled, closing the distance between them with predatory intent. "Your bloodline belongs to those strong enough to claim and control it, not to whoever happened to purchase you first at auction." Elena backed away instinctively, her mind racing for any possible escape or defense. But Draven's approach left her little room to maneuver along the narrow wall walkway. Drawing upon every ounce of developing ability she possessed, she reached outward with her senses, searching desperately for any weakness she might exploit against his aggressive advance. What she found, unexpectedly, was something she had not previously considered utilizing, a resonance within Draven's own pack bonds that suggested deep, unaddressed insecurity beneath his aggressive exterior. Insecurity rooted in his own father's historical failures to secure sufficient territory and influence for the Blackthorn Pack decades earlier. "Your ambition stems from your father's failures, doesn't it?" Elena said suddenly, her voice carrying surprising steadiness despite her fear. "You seek to prove yourself capable of achieving what he never could, and you believe controlling my bloodline will finally secure that validation." Draven's advance faltered slightly, surprise flickering across his features at her unexpected insight. "You know nothing of my family's history." "I know enough," Elena continued, pressing her sudden advantage carefully, buying precious time as she sensed Kale's rapid approach from elsewhere along the wall. Enough to recognize that no amount of power you claim through force will ever fill the void your father's disappointment created within you. This path you have chosen will only lead to further isolation, further desperate grasping for validation that can never truly satisfy you. Silence, Draven snarled, though his renewed advance carried noticeably less conviction than before, her words clearly striking uncomfortably close to truths he had perhaps never fully acknowledged even to himself. Before he could close the remaining distance, Kale arrived with explosive force, tackling Draven away from Elena with brutal efficiency, the two alphas grappling fiercely along the narrow wall walkway. Elena watched in horrified fascination as the battle between them intensified, both warriors drawing upon considerable strength and skill, honed through years of leadership and combat experience. The fight proved brutal and prolonged, neither alpha gaining clear advantage for several tense minutes, until finally Kale managed to secure a decisive hold, forcing Draven to the ground with unmistakable finality. "Yield," Kale demanded, his voice carrying absolute authority despite his own obvious exhaustion from the prolonged confrontation. Draven struggled briefly against Kale's hold before finally, reluctantly, ceasing his resistance, his expression twisted with bitter defeat. "This is not finished, Ashford," he snarled, though the words carried hollow conviction given his current helpless position. "It is finished," Kale countered firmly. "Your forces are retreating, your assault has failed, and you now stand defeated before the very crown you sought to challenge. Whatever remains of your ambitions, Draven, they end here tonight." With the confrontation between the two alphas resolved, and word spreading quickly among the remaining Blackthorn forces of their leader's defeat, the tide of battle shifted decisively in Ashford's favor. Within another hour, the surviving Blackthorn warriors had either surrendered or retreated entirely, leaving the field around Ashford Keep littered with the debris of failed conquest rather than triumphant victory. Elena rushed to Kale's side as guards secured Draven for formal judgment before the convocation, relief and lingering adrenaline combining into an overwhelming wave of emotion that left her trembling despite the battle's resolution. "You are hurt," she said, noticing several visible injuries marking his exposed skin. "Nothing that will not heal," Kale reassured her, though exhaustion evident in his voice suggested the confrontation had cost him more than he readily admitted. "What matters now is that you remain safe, and that Draven's threat has finally been addressed." "Thanks to you," Elena said softly. "Thanks to both of us," Kale corrected gently, his hand finding hers once again, their fingers interlacing with familiar comfort despite the chaos that had just unfolded around them. "Your insight regarding his commander's reluctance, and your ability to identify his deeper insecurities, proved instrumental in this victory, Elena. This was not a battle won by strength alone." As the Keep's forces began the lengthy process of addressing the battle's aftermath, tending to wounded warriors and securing captured prisoners, Elena allowed herself, for the first time since Draven's forces had first appeared upon the horizon, a small measure of genuine relief. The immediate threat had been resolved, though she understood clearly that formal judgment before the convocation and the broader political implications of Draven's defeat still remained to be addressed in the days ahead. But for this moment, standing amid the aftermath of battle beside Kale, their hands still interlaced and their bond humming with shared relief and quiet gratitude, Elena felt something she had not experienced in longer than she could remember, a genuine sense of safety, and perhaps, cautiously, the first fragile stirrings of something that felt remarkably like belonging. 3 weeks passed following the battle at Ashford Keep, weeks filled with the complicated work of formal judgment, territorial reorganization, and the slow process of healing both physical wounds and the deeper uncertainties that had plagued Elena throughout her extraordinary journey. Draven Cross, stripped of his position as alpha of the Blackthorn Pack by unanimous convocation ruling, now faced permanent exile from the territories, his ambitions finally and completely extinguished by his own reckless aggression. Elena stood once again within the grand convocation chamber, though the circumstances surrounding this visit differed entirely from her first tense appearance weeks earlier. Sunlight streamed through the chamber's high windows, illuminating the assembled alphas with a warmth that seemed to reflect the changed atmosphere following Draven's defeat and the formal resolution of the territorial disputes his ambitions had threatened to reignite. "The matter before this convocation today," the elderly alpha who had previously supported Elena's autonomy declared, rising to address the assembled representatives, "concerns the full awakening and formal recognition of Elena Voss's Lyrian heritage, and the implications this holds for the future governance of our territories." Elena felt a subtle hum of energy building within her chest as the proceedings began, her abilities having grown considerably more refined and powerful throughout the weeks following the battle, as though the resolution of immediate danger had finally allowed her true potential to fully emerge without the constant distraction of survival and conflict. Cale stood beside her, his presence steady and reassuring, their bond having deepened considerably since that harrowing night atop the keep's defensive walls. What had begun as an emergency measure to save her life had evolved, over the following weeks, into something neither of them had anticipated, but both had come to treasure deeply. A genuine partnership built upon mutual respect, growing affection, and shared purpose that extended far beyond mere political obligation. Elena Voss, the elderly Alpha continued, turning his attention directly toward her. The historical texts describe a final stage of Lyrian awakening, one that grants formal recognition and authority within convocation proceedings, contingent upon the individual demonstrating sufficient mastery of their inherited abilities. Are you prepared to undergo this final demonstration? Elena glanced briefly toward Cale, finding steady confidence reflected in his pale eyes, before turning back to address the assembled Alphas directly. I am prepared, she confirmed, her voice carrying clear conviction that would have seemed impossible for the frightened girl who had once stood trembling upon an auction block. The demonstration that followed drew upon every aspect of the abilities Elena had cultivated throughout her extraordinary journey, extending her awareness across the entire chamber, sensing not merely surface emotions but the deeper currents of historical grievance and unspoken ambition that had long complicated relationships between the various territories. With careful, deliberate precision, she began addressing these underlying tensions directly, offering insight and potential resolution to conflicts that had persisted for generations without adequate acknowledgement. She spoke of the disputed hunting grounds between northern and eastern territories, offering a compromise solution that honored both regions' historical claims while establishing clearer boundaries for future generations. She addressed the resentment felt by smaller packs toward the convocation's traditional power structure, proposing formal mechanisms that would ensure their voices received equal consideration in future proceedings. As she spoke, something remarkable began occurring throughout the chamber. A subtle but unmistakable shift in the emotional atmosphere among the assembled Alphas, tension and suspicion gradually giving way to genuine consideration, and, in many cases, growing respect for the wisdom and insight Elena's unique perspective provided. The Lyrian gift, long dormant and nearly forgotten, revealed itself finally in its full, historical significance, a genuine capacity for unification and understanding that transcended mere political calculation. When Elena finally concluded her demonstration, silence fell across the chamber, broken eventually by the elderly Alpha's quiet but firm declaration. The convocation formally recognizes Elena Voss as a legitimate authority within these proceedings, carrying full historical rights and responsibilities associated with the Lyrian bloodline. A wave of formal acknowledgement swept through the gathered Alphas, many rising to offer respectful bows toward Elena, a gesture that would have seemed impossible only months earlier when she had arrived at this same chamber as a recently purchased slave, rather than a recognized figure of significant authority and respect. Following the formal convocation proceedings, Cale requested a private audience with Elena within the keep's gardens, the same peaceful location where their relationship had first begun deepening beyond simple political obligation into something considerably more personal and meaningful. You have accomplished something remarkable, Elena, Cale said, as they walked together beneath the same flowering trees that had witnessed so many of their earlier conversations. Not merely surviving the circumstances forced upon you, but transforming those circumstances into genuine strength and purpose that will benefit these territories for generations to come. I could not have accomplished any of this without your support, Elena replied honestly, her hand finding his as they walked, their fingers interlacing with the familiar comfort born from weeks of shared trust and growing affection. Cale stopped walking, turning to face her directly, his expression carrying a vulnerability she had rarely witnessed from him during their earlier interactions. Elena, what exists between us now extends considerably beyond the ancient pact that first brought us together. I find myself caring for you in ways I never anticipated when I first saw your mark at that auction, ways that have nothing to do with historical obligation, and everything to do with who you have proven yourself to be. Elena's heart raced at his words, the growing warmth within their bond confirming the sincerity behind his declaration. I feel the same, she admitted softly. What began as fear and uncertainty has grown into something I never imagined possible, given how our journey together first started. Then allow me to ask you something, Cale said, his voice carrying careful hope despite his obvious nervousness. Not as your protector, not as the Alpha King fulfilling an ancient obligation, but simply as a man who has come to care for you deeply. Would you consider remaining here, not merely under my protection, but as my partner, my equal, sharing in the responsibilities and authority that both our bloodlines now represent?" Tears gathered in Elena's eyes, though they carried none of the fear and despair that had once accompanied her tears upon that auction block weeks earlier. "Yes," she said simply, the single word carrying the full weight of everything she had endured, and everything she had come to hope for throughout this extraordinary journey. "I would consider that, Cale, more than anything else I could possibly imagine for my future." Their embrace, when it finally came, felt like the culmination of everything that had transpired since that fateful day at the auction block, the fear and uncertainty gradually transforming into genuine partnership and affection that neither had anticipated, but both had come to treasure deeply. In the months that followed, Elena's formal recognition as an authority within the convocation, combined with her deepening partnership with Cale, gradually reshaped the political landscape across the territories. Old grievances found new avenues for resolution, smaller pacts discovered greater voice within collective governance, and the ancient promise of unity that the Lyrian bloodline had once represented finally found genuine expression after generations of dormancy and near extinction. The girl who had once been sold to settle her family's debt, who had stood trembling and afraid upon an auction block expecting nothing but continued cruelty and control, had transformed entirely into a figure of genuine strength, wisdom, and authority. Her mark no longer a source of fear and uncertainty, but a symbol of hope and unity for territories that had struggled for generations under fractured, competing ambitions. And beside her, throughout this remarkable transformation, stood Cale Ashford, the Alpha King who had recognized, in that single crucial moment at the auction, not merely an ancient obligation demanding fulfillment, but the potential for something far greater than either of them could have anticipated when their extraordinary journey together first began. The mark that had once been dismissed as a curse by Elena's own family had finally revealed its true purpose, not as a burden to be hidden and feared, but as a legacy of unity and strength that would continue shaping the future of the territories for generations yet to come, a fitting conclusion to a journey that had begun in cruelty and betrayal, but had ultimately blossomed into genuine partnership, respect, and love.